Hi everyone, Mr. O here. I'm excited to kick off our second read aloud. And for our second read aloud, I have chosen Island of the Blue Dolphins by Scott Odell. And this book came back into my life recently. It was loaned to me by a member of the community who thought it might be a good read aloud, and I went ahead and read it um, while I was ill, and it brought me back to my childhood, which is actually when I read this book for the first time many years ago now, and it reminded me a lot of my childhood, and it reminded me of the time when I loved to be outside, to build forts or go exploring in the woods near my house, and playing with my brother these very imaginative um, games, and we would really get really engrossed in it. It also reminded me of the story Robinson Crusoe, which I read to the class 2 years ago. So third years, you might recall this story in connection to the fundamental human needs. And as we get further and further into this, I'm curious to see what connections it brings to mind when you think about Robinson Crusoe. So I'm excited to kick this off. And as we go, I'm going to share some bits of information about this story because it is a piece of historical fiction. So that means it's fiction. It's a story that is made up by our author Scott Odell, but it's historical. So the story is it has some basis in fact. There are some facts. I'm not going to reveal any of it right now, but there are some facts in here that are, in fact, true. Now, our author, Scott Odell, wanted this to be a very compelling story, and so not everything was known, and so he needed to add certain things or maybe change the order of things to make it more interesting or to build drama with cliffhangers, things like that. But as we go, I'll be sure to share some of the factual historical information from our story. All right, so without further ado, let's kick off with Chapter 1. Chapter 1. I remember the day the Aleut ship came to our island. At first it seemed like a small shell afloat on the sea. Then it grew larger and was a gull with folded wings. At last, in the rising sun, it became what it really was, a red ship with 2 red sails. My brother and I had gone to the head of a canyon that winds down to a little harbor, which is called Coral Cove. We had gone to gather roots that grow there in the spring. My brother, Ramo, was only a little boy half my age, which was 12. He was small for one who had lived so many suns and moons, but he was quick as a cricket. Also foolish as a cricket when he was excited. For this reason, and because I wanted him to help gather roots and not go running off, I told him nothing about the shell I saw or the gull with folded wings. I went on digging in the brush with my pointed stick as though nothing at all were happening on the sea, even when I knew for sure that the gull was really a ship with 2 red sails. But Ramo's eyes missed very little in the world. They were black like a lizard's and very large, and, like the eye of a lizard, could sometimes look sleepy. This was a time when they saw the most, however. This was what they looked like now. They were half closed, like those of a lizard lying on a rock, about to flick out its tongue to catch a fly. The sea is smooth, Ramo said. It is a flat stone without any scratches. My brother liked to pretend that one thing was another. The sea is not a stone without scratches, I informed him. It is water, with no waves. To me, it is a blue stone, Ramo continued, and far away, on the edge of it, is a small cloud, which sits on that stone. Ramo, clouds do not sit on stones, on blue ones or black ones or any kind of stone. This one does. Not on the sea, I said. Dolphins sit there, and gulls, and cormorants, and otter, and whales too. but not clouds. It is a whale, maybe. Ramo was standing on one foot and then the other, watching the ship coming, which he did not know was a ship because he had never seen one before. I also had never seen one, but I knew how they looked because I had been told. While you gaze at the sea, I said, I dig roots, and it is I who will eat them, and you who will not. Ramo began to punch at the earth with his stick, but as the ship came closer, its sails showing red through the morning mist, he kept watching it, acting all the time like he wasn't. Have you ever seen a red whale? He asked. Yes, I said, even though I never had. Those that I have seen have always been gray. Well, you are very young, Ramo, and have not seen everything that swims in the world. Ramo picked up a root and was about to drop it into the basket. Suddenly, his mouth opened wide and closed again. A canoe! He cried. A great big one! Bigger than all of our canoes together! And red! A canoe or a ship. It did not matter to Ramo. In the very next breath, he tossed the root in the air and was gone, crashing through the brush, shouting as he went. I kept on gathering roots, but my hands trembled as I dug in the earth, for I was more excited than my brother. I knew that it was a ship there on the sea, and not a big canoe, and that a ship could mean many things. I wanted to drop the stick and run too, but I went on digging roots because they were needed in the village. By the time I filled the basket, the aloud ship had sailed around the wide kelp bed that encloses our island, and between the two rocks that guard Coral Cove. Word of its coming had already reached the village of Galisat. Carrying their weapons, our men sped along the trail which winds down to the shore. Our women were gathering at the edge of the mesa. I made my way through the heavy brush, and moving swiftly down the ravine until I came to the sea cliffs. There I crouched on my hands and knees. Below me lay the cove. The tide was out, and the sun shone on the white sands of the beach. Half the men from our village stood at the water's edge. The rest were concealed or hidden among the rocks at the foot of the trail, ready to attack the intruders should they prove unfriendly. As I crouched there, in the toyon bushes, trying not to fall over the cliff, but trying to keep myself hidden and yet to see and hear what went on below me, a boat left the ship. 6 men with long oars were rowing. Their faces were broad, and shining dark hair fell over their eyes. When they came closer, I saw that they had bone ornaments through their noses. Behind them in the boat stood a tall man with a yellow beard. I had never seen a Russian before, but my father had told me about them, and I wondered, seeing the way he stood with his feet set apart and his fists on his hips, and looked at the little harbor as though it was already belonged to him. I wondered if he were one of those men from the north whom our people feared. I was certain of it when the boat slid to the shore and he jumped out, shouting as he did so. His voice echoed against the rock walls of the cove. The words were strange, unlike any I had ever heard. Slowly then he spoke in our tongue. I come in peace and wish to parley, he said to the men on the shore. To parley is to have a conversation and try to settle 2 different opinions. You might call it a compromise. It's like a negotiation. None of the men, our men, answered, but my father, who was one of those hidden among the rocks, came forward down the sloping shore. He thrust his spear into the sand. I am Chief of Galisat, he said. My name is Chief Chowig. I was surprised that he gave his real name to a stranger. You see, everyone in our tribe had 2 names. The real one, which was a secret and was seldom used, and one which was common. For if people use your secret name, it becomes worn out and loses its magic. Thus, I became known as Wanapale, which means the girl with the long black hair, though my secret name is Karana. My father's secret name was Chowig. Why he gave it to a stranger, I do not know. The Russian smiled and held up his hand, calling himself Captain Orlov. My father also held up his hand. I could not see his face, but I doubt that he smiled in return. "I have come with 40 of my men," said the Russian. "We come to hunt sea otter. We wish to camp on your island while we are hunting." My father said nothing. He was a tall man, though not as tall as Captain Orlov, and he stood with his bare shoulders thrown back, thinking about what the Russian had just said. He was in no hurry to reply, because the Aleuts had come before to hunt otter. That was long ago in the past, but my father still remembered them. "You remember another hunt," Captain Orlov said, after my father had grown silent. "I have heard of it. It was led by Captain Mitrif. He was a fool and is now dead. The trouble arose because you and your tribe did all of the hunting." "We hunted," said my father, "but the one you call a fool wished us to hunt from one moon to the next, never ceasing, no stop." "This time you will need to do nothing," Captain Orlov said. "My men will hunt and we will divide the catch. 1 part for you to be paid in goods, and 2 parts for us." "The parts must be equal," my father disagreed. Captain Orlov gazed off toward the sea. "We can talk of that later, when my supplies are safely ashore." The morning was fair with little wind, yet it was the season of the year when storms could be looked for, so I understood why the Russian wished to move onto our island. "It is better to agree now," said my father. Captain Orlov took 2 long steps away from my father, then turned and faced him. "1 part to you is fair, since the work is ours, as is the risk." My father shook his head no. The Russian grasped his beard. "Since the sea is not yours, why do I have to give you any?" "The sea which surrounds the island of the Blue Dolphins belongs to us," answered my father. He spoke softly as he did when he was angry. "From here to the coast of Santa Barbara? 20 leagues away?" "No," my father said. "Only that which touches the island and where the otter live." Captain Orlov made a sound in his throat. He looked at our men standing on the beach and towards those who had now come from behind the rocks. He looked at my father and shrugged his shoulders. Suddenly he smiled, showing his long teeth. "The parts shall be equal," Captain Orlov said. He said more, but I did not hear it, for at that instant, in my great excitement, I moved a small rock, which clattered down the cliff and fell directly in front of his feet. Everyone on the beach looked up. Silently, I left the toyon bushes and ran without stopping until I reached the mesa.